Alright, this might be a short video, but I wanted to add ammunition ideas for my based games mechanics video series. And basically, I formulated the vast majority of the basic mechanics for people, but I kind of added that like bowman and javelin throwing and like bowman slash crossbowman and javelin sling throwers would be a legitimate sort of process. So basically, I would let the bows, crossbows, javelins, and slings have their what's it called? Um, Basic stats. For instance, bows and crossbows being agility based, and javelins and slings being strength based. Determine who's using them, but I would give them all basically the same options here, which is elemental, so fire, ice, air, earth, um, sort of arrows or something, where you just like add like 50% of the regular damage done as elemental of that type, and plus 50% to hit chance and so on. Um, you know, or maybe not hit chance, but like 20% hit chance, 50% extra damage done as the elemental or something, so that you can maximize, or 100% done extra as elemental, or make the entire damage elemental instead of adding damage as elemental, and letting elemental penalties determine the extra damage. But basically, long story short, the four elements as arrows, and figure out some sort of system, whether that's adding a little bit of damage as elemental as well as regular damage, or like making the entire damage elemental and adding a bit of hit chance for the blessing part. Or I would do like, and like, that's like, I haven't picked which one. I literally just came up with that as I was talking just now, sort of, as the specifics. But like, I would also add like 2 or 3 arrow variants on top of regular arrows, where like one would be acid or something that would like, or serrated. So like acid would be like, um acid would be like um corrosive damage, and it would be done over time as well as the initial hit with a little 20% boost to damage on hit. No extra chance to hit. Um, Reduces armor, does a bit of damage over time, and um, like 100% extra damage over time. No extra chance to hit. Uh, each arrow shot breaks armor by a certain percentage, and or or like a non-stacking armor reduction over 5 turns or something, and it does like 20% of the arrow's damage as corrosive over time, which can technically stack. I don't mean like you, like for instance, if you shoot 2 arrows, one on one turn and the next on the other turn. What I mean to say is, its version of corrosive damage is on the first shot for the first turn, you do 20% extra damage, and then like the next 4 turns, that 20% of damage is done, and then the next turn, you or next 5 turns or whatever, the 20% damage is done, so you get 100% damage done extra on top of the arrow regular impact. And then like the second turn, the first tick of the corrosive damage occurs, and you shoot them again with the same type of arrow. The armor reduction will reset to the next 5 turns, It won't like stack in terms of intensity of armor damage, but the damage will be like, for the third turn will be like 40% of a single arrow, because you're stacking the one arrow with the other arrow, and then like the fourth turn will be like the same thing basically. You shoot them with a regular arrow, let's say, so you're not adding any of this stuff to them or whatever. And to explain simply how this works, not that you would want to do that. You'd use another corrosive arrow if possible, probably, or something. But you know what I mean. And what would happen is, for the fourth turn, you get 40% or two 20% of the arrow damages done as a tick, and then you would, for the fifth turn, it would be the same, but then on the sixth turn, it would just be the 20% again, I think is how it works. For the second arrow shot on the second turn, basically. And then on the sixth turn, it would be no extra damage because you're using regular arrows and the damage has finally run off or something. It wouldn't be like a stacking where if you just keep stacking, it just gets more and more intense, and like literally like if you're like shooting 5 turns in a row, for instance, it's not going to stack to like 100%, and then like be like 100%. It won't be like 100% ticks per turn for the next 5 turns, ramping up every time completely, and like ignoring that. So basically, like each damage over time would be its own stack, basically, of damage. But like the armor reduction would be static, so it wouldn't stack. Anyways, that's a little bit nerdy and so on, but whatever. Okay, so the elemental damage, the corrosive damage, bleeding arrows. Serrated or barbed arrows would be more physical damage, where you're doing like 50% damage over 3 turns or something, so it's a little more intense, but it wouldn't carry the armor reduction. And I would add like a 50% hit chance to them or something like that, basically. So that way the rogues and stuff like that or something would be easier to hit, and like it would bleed them out a little faster and so on for an archer or something. And then I would have, so that's 6 arrow types and so on. And this would go for slings and, this would go for bows and crossbows at least, and probably javelins or something. And slings, I guess I would put the same way as well, basically. I know it might not make entire sense, but game mechanics wise, it would be just pretty cool in a way, and so on. Actually, no. Sorry, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with something for slings specifically. This will work for javelins as well, by the way, this stuff. I'll think of another system for slings, because slings are a special case where their entire shtick is cheapness. So, okay, maybe what I'll do is I'll make slings stones cheaper because they do net less damage naturally and so on, so I'll make it cheaper for them, but I'll keep the 6 arrow types so far, and there's only 2 more arrow types that I want to mention. Basically, I would have +2 arrows of magic and +5 arrows of magic. Now the +2 arrows would be doing 20% more damage with a 50% hit chance extra, and the +5 arrows would be doing 50% damage with a +100% hit chance. And both of them would have about 50% extra damage done on top of that, on the previous damage. So you get your baseline arrow damage, you get the plus 20 or 50% damage, and then on top, like not just like 170% damage as opposed to 120% damage, but like plus 60% damage, because 50% of 120 is 60, not 50 for 100. So like you would do 180% regular damage to the target for a +2 arrow if it's a demon or undead, and for the +5 arrow, you'd be doing 225% damage towards a demon or an undead or something like that. And what this means is there will be a niche role for ammunition usage based on the type of enemy in basically every case for special ammunition. The natural stats of bows, crossbows, slings, and javelins. Like the thing that differentiates a bow and a crossbow is the bows. The crossbow takes 2 action points to reload and 4 action points to shoot, and the bow you just shoot 4 action points and then shoot again 4 action points. The sling is defined by its cheapness and its low damage, and the javelin is defined by its high damage, very expensive ammunition. They're also defined, bow and crossbow, by agility stat working for them, and its unique weapon skill, and they're also their secondary effects to bows and crossbows. And the slings and arrows are defined by their secondary effects on those weapons, and the fact that they're strength-based. So the point of that is to give warriors and rogues 2 ranged weapons each, while emphasizing constancy of usage for bows and crossbows for a rogue type if they so choose, and slings and javelins for the warrior types if they so choose to use ranged weapons, with a more extreme sort of version of high damage, high expensiveness to use, and low damage, low expensiveness to use. And then, of course, I mentioned the other weapons before in my previous videos, and like daggers and, I don't know, scimitars or something, like daggers and short swords or something. I can't remember exactly what, but you know, that kind of thing. And this would add to okay, I think I figured out the arrows, elemental arrows actually. The specific thing I would use is plus 50% to elemental damage and plus 50% to hit. So that way, if it's resistant to physical damage because it's an elemental or something, then like, you know, it's like, whatever, man. You know, it's the elemental damage makes up for it, so you're doing roughly equivalent damage, and you're more likely to hit. So it's alleviates some of the problems there. So, and the thing about the plus to hit thing is it makes rogues, or it makes special ammunition users, in most cases, except for serrated or corrosive, which will be useful for high HP, easy to hit targets, whether they have a lot of armor for corrosive or no armor for serrated arrows, bleed arrows, basically. It gives those a purpose. The elemental arrows give like extra versus dragons or elementals or something like that. So like that's like a thing. So you can balance the elemental versus the serrated versus the corrosive And the magic arrows will be demons and undead specifically coded, but also generically better. And I'll make them more expensive than everything else because they're good against anything basically. So you can be lazy logistically if you want. It'll just cost some money to focus on magic arrows or something like that. And the other ammunition types will be cheaper, but like making it this way encourages ammunition shooting ammunition users to exist and play with weapon types a little bit or ammunition types on their chosen weapons without penalizing them too much. So there will be, and the point of this is so that, like, basically, no matter what, the special ammunition is almost always useful if it's elemental or magic. Well, no, it's always useful if it's magic. It's almost always useful if it's elemental on some level, and it's very niche useful if it's corrosive or bleed arrow on high HP targets, basically. Um, and you could stack the corrosive arrow with the magician's acid splash or whatever, corrosion, and like the mace's armor break or something to like synergize so that your dagger using rogue can like critical strike and do so much damage to the toughest juggernaut, pure plated metal, whatever, and still pierce the armor with a dagger because you've debuffed it so hard. So it's about synergizing, not penalizing too much. It's about balancing synergies, and balancing them while encouraging them and allowing you to pick your own path of particular choice in this regard and so on. And the the trouble for me is how to balance the game around that with unique types of enemies and so on. And like, I think one of the things what I'll do is I'll make it so that there's like either a tough enemy or 2 or 3 tough-ish enemies, not as tough as a single enemy. And then I'll make like 5 reasonably sort of medium enemies, or I'll make like something like that in the beginning, and then as the late game occurs more and more, I'll add more variety in enemy types, like the 1 tough guy or the 3 tough-ish guys, but like also combine it with 5 weak enemies. So there'll be more enemies sometimes, or tougher enemies sometimes, or like a combination of both at random encounters and stuff like that, basically, as the game progresses. So it's not just going to be like one play thing where it's like Pokemon, where it's one-on-one every single time, and you get bigger numbers, and that's all you get, and everything's meta in terms of development of like stats and moves. But like the actual battlefield will be more varied in a certain degree, kind of like the development of early game Rome Total War, medieval Total War, or Warhammer Total War into late game, where like your typical units start with like the basic spearmen or swordsmen, and then like you get like 5 groups of those or something, and then you move into like 12 groups of like elite troops or like monsters or like a single monstrous giant as each of those groups and so on. So it'll be kind of like that in a sense throughout the game for enemy types and so on. And another thing is, I thought I would explain my philosophy for this video game mechanic setup, which is part of what this system will do overall, like all these ideas, is it'll solve the linear warrior quadratic wizard problem. Because if you pick rogues for your backup characters, then they have looting to help get scrolls and potions, which will help warriors and mages and priests. And if everyone can use scrolls at 2 action points, then and also the scrolls and potions scale with level, not just magic power or priest spell power. Then it's roughly on par, just not as good. It's like 75% as powerful. But you can use 2 of them. So you like a single mage at level 50 or something casting a fireball versus a scroll using warrior with 2 scrolls would be at like 150% power for the same spell if you use 2 of the same scrolls. But of course, the wizard using 2 scrolls would be at 200% power, and so on. But of course, one of the things that limits warriors often is that they have to be in melee to use their special skills. So, like, synergizing the secondary effects, like I mentioned, bleed for axes, or like armor crush for maces, or like armor pierce for halberds, or like critical strike for spears, or something like that, and so on. By increasing the secondary effects chances for proc based weapons, and also the strength of the effect for the proc chance weapons, and also the static chance weapons, which I'd probably scale at like half the percentage of development as proc chance weapons, because proc is like a percent chance and static is like always happening. So like you have to choose between whether you want something to happen all the time or one to happen as a chance to happen kind of thing. Would scale warriors in a way, as well as damage and crit and hit chance, by the way, in a way that is slightly quadratic. And by having warriors, and the thing about javelins is they would be strength based, so like you wouldn't have to sacrifice your main stat for damage as a warrior, your main basic stat as damage for a warrior, to achieve good results with ranged weapons for slings and javelins. And javelins would be like the peak of damage, but like really expensive. Or scrolls would be the peak of damage for mages, but really expensive. Or like crossbows, or like elemental or magic arrows would be like the peak of damage, but expensive for rogues and stuff like that. Yeah, that's just kind of how I'd manage it. And then everyone has a little bit of quadratic development and a little bit of linear usefulness on some level early game, without like simplifying things too much in regards to character development like a JRPG does, which makes them kind of boring, to be honest, in a way. you could really pick and choose your path, and as long as you knew your path and what you're facing, you can choose the right tools for the job, and like the right tools for the job become more up to individual discretion. But like you actually have to know what you're doing a little bit. And the thing is, this game would not be necessarily for someone that's never played an RPG before. This is like for those who are tired of the samey sort of old RPGs, but they want to use their brain in a relatively intuitive way. Still, but with a little bit of elegance and articulation and um, intricacy, while not being too out of left field, and so on. So your general instincts in a regular RPG would be relatively decent, and you wouldn't have to do much except sort of up your game in terms of um, a little bit. You would only have to up your game a little bit relative to regular RPGs, but like it would be a little bit, and it would be based on balancing around people creating synergies with the path they choose for maximizing things with a lot of options. Uh, and the enemy types you face are the ones that you determine your favorite synergies for. And you can still brute force it and so on, but it would be a lot harder tactically and so on. So, yeah. You'd have to rest a lot more and stuff like that, basically, if you didn't use the synergies properly, and so on. Um, but yeah, that's my plan, and like I haven't figured out an economy or gold or anything like that yet. But I would balance it around that process and so on. Yeah. Anyways, that's enough for today. Thanks for watching.